Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. And we are happy to welcome a new contributor to this week's program. Tony Vanderhoef is my guest. Tony, this is your first time on the show, so for the sake of those who are meeting you for the very first time, let's have you tell a little bit about who you are and also what you do.
Yeah, Brian, thank you so much for having me on. I'm a contributor at Young Voices, and I'm a law student at Florida State University. I kind of focus both my written work and my studies on sort of, the Constitution and the legislative process. And with that, I spend a lot of time tracking, policies and exciting programs that are coming on both at the state and national level.
I'm looking at an article you've written for Counterpunch about New York's universal child care plan and how it risks becoming an affordability failure. And first of all, I have to say I'm paying much more close attention to what's going on in New York since the election of their very openly socialist mayor.
Right.
Sorry, I'm forgetting how to say his name. Mamdani. My apologies.
Yeah, Zoran Mamdani. Yep.
That's it.
Yeah.
So he was promising everything and the kitchen sink when it came to getting him elected. Tell me a little bit about, is this universal child care plan, was this one of his brainchilds, or is this something that someone else has proposed?
Well, this is obviously a policy that is surprisingly very popular on both sides of the aisle. And it was one of the things that he had alluded to during his campaign. I know a number of states have been flirting with this idea. And so a few weeks ago, you have New York Governor Kathy Hochul and New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani. They announced plans for this ambitious universal child care program that promises both free and heavily subsidized care for young children. But interesting enough, they do it at a time where the Trump administration is cracking down on supposed fraud that's taking place in other states like Minnesota. And so it makes you question sort of the idea behind why did they announce that now? And why wouldn't you do it at a time where you know that funding is going to be a bit more certain, especially considering the fact that 75% of that funding comes from federal funds. And so if there's not a good line of communication and you're not launching an expansive, ambitious program like this on good standing, it just remains to be seen how this is going to work out. And that's, the core issue that I explain and explore in this piece.
It does have a sound of maybe they're throwing a little caution to the wind, like, well, if we announce it and we start it, we have no choice but to come up with the funding for it. But my understanding is New York is not the only state. There are a lot of states that are looking right now at how they can, trim back their operating costs. Tell me, what is the scope of this universal child care? Is this supposed to be free child care for, I guess, what are the qualifications for a person to receive this?
Well, that's what's interesting is we don't yet know. There have been some ongoing talks about what the specifics will be, but I still feel like that's going to come from securing that funding first. And then sort of the realities of what the program is going to look like will then, begin to take shape. And, because I alluded to like the desire for it. And in the piece, we talk about the recent polling that came out of the Bipartisan Policy Center, that found that 71% of Republican voters in that primary said that making childcare more affordable is one of the most pro-family, pro-worker, actions that government can take. And that shows you that this is not just going to be a policy that is a Democrat issue. It's very much a Republican issue as well. And I think there's an opportunity both for, at the national level and at the state level, states like New York, maybe even states like Florida, and you can just go down the list, where there's going to be opportunities to make something that can work and is popular. But yeah, the specifics, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out for sure.
Well, and it makes me wonder too, just because there is support of it in the political sense, apparently bipartisan support.
Right.
Does the market itself actually support such a thing? And I'm not an economist, but I've hung around enough economists to know that if it's something that has to be propped up by government, sometimes that's an indicator that the market itself really isn't invested, in that particular thing.
Exactly. And that's where you run into the potential issue of this being an affordability failure, because if the market is not there to support it and funding is uncertain, then suddenly you have thousands, if not millions of families that are sort of left adrift. And obviously you don't want that. I'm a father of young kids. And luckily, we're able to make things work with just my wife being at home. But if that weren't the case, I cannot imagine, having to keep up with, the $1,000 to $1,300, average cost a month. And then, footing that cost and then trying to get get that payment back from these programs like they're promising. And then that funding isn't there. And then you're sort of left to deal with that. And yeah, I think that just exemplifies why this is such an important issue and why you need to get it right. And it shows you why funding needs to be certain. And there needs to be a system of reliance there so families can build expectations, realistic expectations. And so, yeah, I just think it's an important issue. And there really is, opportunity to do something that works for families that really need it, but it can't be done, this way.
I really like in your article how you expand on why the stable approach is the better way to go. It may not make all the headlines and may not have quite the fanfare that, like this announcement from the governor and the mayor have had, but it's something that it's a known quantity and it's something people can count on. Is this kind of a harbinger of what's to come in terms of, are we going to see more public policy based on, well, the unstable approach works, let's go with that just to make sure that we can actually get it out there?
Right. I certainly hope not, but I think politically it's not a bad strategy, unfortunately, because, look at it from their perspective, like Mamdani and Governor Hochul. You can announce this ambitious, exciting program. He just got elected and he had a lot of big promises, that he outlined during his campaign, and they announced this. Everyone's excited to hear about it. Obviously, families are going to be on board with this, but it's not often that they realize sort of the hoops and, obstacles you're going to have to overcome to realize this as a real program that can help families and kids and the like. And when you consider the fact that they can just hide behind, hey, the Trump administration blocked this down, and you sort of, you have the perfect excuse. So you have the excitement and sort of the boost in approval that comes from announcing this program. But then you also have that excuse in your back pocket to where you can say, hey, look, we're not on the hook for this. We're not responsible for the fact it didn't go through because, the Trump administration blocked it from happening. And so it's strategic, and there's a lot of use cases for that. But I think ultimately that's not the way to do it. And that's not sort of governance that, New Yorkers need. And I hopefully other states, don't follow that same example.
I think you're taking a very reasonable approach here, especially in that you point out in there's a couple of policies that represent longstanding programs that, whether people agree with them or not, at least they are not they're not an unknown quantity. They're not something that maybe here today or gone tomorrow. I think you specifically mentioned Medicaid and the child tax credit as examples of.
Correct.
They're not perfect, but the reason they persist is because at least there's something you can hang your hat on.
Exactly. And I tried to make that the focus of the piece. Is not that I'm really advocating one way or the other, because I can really see for, why someone would be for or against this, but rather if you're going to do it, there's a right way to do it. And it's not this way. You need reliance, you need certainty, and you need an open line of communication with the federal government if you're going to rely on them for almost 75% of the funding.
There's also a great economic lesson in your article, too, where you talk about markets require clear rules to work. And I love your line here about how stability doesn't and shouldn't crowd out private participation. It actually should enable it. And that's ultimately where it seems like we're going to find most of the solutions. Let the market do its work, and then government doesn't have to do as much tap dancing.
Absolutely.
So tell me this, Tony, where can people find you on social media, and where can they follow your work?
Yeah, you can find me on social media at Tony Vanderhoef, and that's all one word, no underscore, no space or anything like that. And you could also find my work published in the Counterpunch just recently. I have an upcoming piece with The Hill that will be published soon. And of course, many things to come, working with young voices. It's been a world-class experience so far. And I also have a free newsletter you can follow along with. It's at commonground.news, and it's absolutely free to sign up and to get my information through there as well. Thanks again for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Ed Tarnowski back to the program. Ed, you've been on here a number of times, but for those who are meeting you for the first time, tell us about yourself.
Absolutely. Well, my name is Ed Tarnowski. I'm a policy and advocacy director at EdChoice and a senior contributor to Young Voices, where I focus on tech innovation, education, and capitalism.
Very nice. I'm looking at an article that you wrote for Reason.com about next generation nuclear power and how it can meet data center energy demand if the regulations allow it. And I live in a pretty rural area of the country, but I got to tell you, that's a topic I hear discussed because, there are, aims to put, data centers or wind farms or, that solar farms and that kind of thing. Talk to me about next generation nuclear power. When we say that phrase, what does that refer to?
Mm-hmm. Well, the first of the piece, while advanced nuclear goes beyond small modular reactors, that's the focus of the piece. And just to give a background of what that is, small modular reactors are essentially kind of like mini nuclear reactors. So they're like very different from the traditional nuclear reactor, which is designed to be connected to a grid and and produce mass amounts of power in a grid style power plant. Small modular nuclear reactors are a little different. They're really small. They produce less energy, and they can actually be placed on site in many of these data center places, so small enough to be fit on site, and they can operate off the grid. They're efficient, they're clean, they run 24/7, they run for decades. So it's a really exciting technology, and I think this may finally be their moment.
Talk to me about the safety concerns, because it seems like whenever the word nuclear comes up, some people, China syndrome, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, something is going to happen. It's been a while since any major kind of nuclear power plant mishap. I'm guessing technology has come a long way in the last 40 years.
It has come a long way. And frankly, it was very safe back even decades ago, at least in America. People bring Chernobyl up a lot, but what people often misunderstand is the Chernobyl accident was, the Soviets essentially had the power plant in an airplane hangar. There really wasn't any containment structure. That is not how nuclear works in the United States or in the West. And small modular nuclear is very small. The risk of nuclear is already very low. The risk of small modular is even lower, if it can get lower. Nuclear, we see fewer deaths from nuclear than even wind and solar, which are very low as well, because it's just that safe. And what we are seeing too is a lot of the quote waste that comes out of nuclear is even recyclable. And reusable. Wow. So it's really fascinating stuff. And it's remarkably safe. The only short-term byproduct is steam, water vapor. So it's remarkably safe. And if we can operate these things if they can be off the grid and take away the concerns of some of the data center power demand going into communities, then I think that's something that should certainly be on the table.
Okay, I want to backtrack just a little bit because I need to understand a little bit better about the growing demands of these data centers. You mentioned AI right from the get-go, and it's here. For people, oh yes, that's going to be a thing one day. No, it's a thing today. Talk to me about what is needed to keep up with the ways that AI is becoming incorporated into pretty much everything that we do.
Absolutely, it is, and it's here. And whether you like it or not, it's here, and it's going to be growing. And if America doesn't do it, then our adversaries will. China's continuing to steam ahead. Whoever is the winner and ahead in the AI race will have a mass advantage in technology and potential future warfare and deterrence. So it's really important that America does win this race for AI. And so the issue that we're seeing though is these data centers are consuming mass amounts of energy. As AI only continues, to your point, to become more integrated into our lives, its energy demands will only increase because we're going to need more data centers. The great thing about small modular nuclear reactors is, as I mentioned, they operate off the grid. These data centers are using mass amounts of energy, so you are seeing concerns over environmental impact, over cost concerns, over grid capacity, because America's grid is aging, and eventually it's going to, and it already is, not being prepared in many aspects. Small modular reactors solve that problem because they operate off the grid. Again, as I mentioned, these data centers need to be operating 24/7. Data center companies need to plan decades in advance. Small modular nuclear, like I said, can run 24/7, no problem. And it can run and make plans for decades, not just years. So it's kind of, the way that I see it is small modular creates the perfect condition, is kind of solves the data center issue, but also data centers are creating the perfect environment for small modular reactors in a way that we haven't seen before, because it's just so perfectly tailored for this situation.
Okay, let's talk about regulations now. I'm very much, on board with what you're talking about, thinking this is wonderful. This sounds like such an answer. And then I remember, oh yeah, but we have a whole regulatory apparatus that still this is going to have to work its way through. Talk to me about some of the biggest hurdles these small nuclear or these small modular reactors face.
Absolutely. So some of the to give you some perspective, small modular reactors, which are, remember, these are often could be factory built. So there's a startup in Texas called Allo Atomics that can actually deliver some of these small modular, their model, most of it through the U.S. Postal Service, to these companies. It's pretty remarkable. So but they're subject to the same Cold War era regulation as grid capacity nuclear power plant. So that causes delays and lots of issues with being able to scale this as the regulation stands today. An example is there was a big project that was announced in 2015. It was going through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's design review. It was complete in 2023. By then, costs surged substantially. Timelines became so uncertain that you had potential customers just pulling out. In the same year that it was approved, finally, the project was scrapped because it was just too uncertain. Investors and customers need certainty, especially in terms of energy. So what we need here is an updated and streamlined regulatory framework that is representative of the different model that small modular reactors are, because they certainly shouldn't be regulated in the same way as these large nuclear plants. And frankly, those need an upgraded framework as well. But they certainly shouldn't be regulated the same way.
So where does that regulatory reform begin? Is this Congress's responsibility?
So we are actually, there is some good news. The NRC, I believe it was announced, if I'm not mistaken, 2023, and they are essentially, they are required to implement this new rule that will essentially is an updated framework that will better match and regulate SMRs based on the modular nature that they have. It's required to be implemented by the end of next year, but it could come sooner. So there is some movement. It's, of course, there are other barriers as well. States have their own regulatory frameworks, localities. So there are other things to overcome as well, but this is certainly a good first step.
And from the state level, I'm guessing some states may be more receptive to this than others. Is this one of those instances where the market is likely to show who makes the good decision, either in embracing the SMRs or trying to keep them away?
Well, I certainly think so. I mean, we're going to see you have startups ready to go. They have a model ready to go, but because of the current regulatory framework, for example, Allo Atomics, as I mentioned, the startup down in Texas, their model is ready to go for everything except the nuclear fuel portion because of how it's regulated differently. So they can't actually, they want to do it. There are companies that have the demand. The private sector is ready to go on the models, but they can't do it to scale quite yet because of this regulatory framework. So it is to be seen which states are going to move ahead, if they can clear the way, if this federal regulation can. We're going to see how it is in real life, how it works in the real world. But if we can get this right, it could be the answer to our data center energy problems.
I'm dreaming of the day that I have my own little modular reactor, maybe the size of a refrigerator, but it covers
That's
it all.
Right.
Again, we're talking with Ed Tarnowski. He's a senior contributor at Young Voices, also a policy and advocacy director at EdChoice. Where can people find you?
Absolutely. Well, you can follow me on X at Ed Tarnowski. Happy to chat with you there.
Okay, thank you so much for being our guest. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. Looking forward to the next. Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome back to the show Andy Jung.
He is an associate counsel at Tech Freedom and also a Young Voices contributor. Andy, great to have you back on the program. For those maybe meeting you for the first time, take a moment, tell us about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, like you said, my title is associate counsel. I work for Tech Freedom. We're a small tech policy think tank based in Washington, D.C. Basically, I pay attention to what the federal government and the states are doing with regards to AI and other tech policy issues, and respond to those actions by the government, sometimes positively, sometimes with constructive criticism.
Okay. Well, I have to admit, I am one of the people who's kind of late to the ball here, but I finally have reached the acceptance stage where I can say, yes, AI is here. And it is absolutely a reality and will continue to affect things as we move forward. Tell me about what the Federal Trade Commission's interest is in trying to preempt state consumer protection laws, and for that matter, why do the states want consumer protection laws regarding AI?
Well, consumer protection is a really important area of law. The Federal Trade Commission protects consumers for unfair acts or practices and deceptive acts or practices. Those are kind of two different buckets. The article that I wrote is focused on deceptive acts and practices. So you can think of false advertising as a classic example of deceptive practices by businesses. And the Federal Trade Commission is getting involved in AI because their authority is a broad mandate. They don't only regulate specific technologies or specific businesses. Their authority spans across the entire economy. And as AI is growing in importance in terms of the economy and in terms of just society in general, the Federal Trade Commission has stepped in to see if there's any unfair practices regarding AI that are sort of bubbling to the surface that they want to stamp out before they get too prominent, as well as deceptive practices. And with the Super Bowl this past weekend, advertising in AI outputs is sort of becoming a prominent issue. OpenAI announced they're going to include ads in their model outputs. So, for example, if OpenAI didn't label the ads and the outputs of their AI, if they were sort of woven in as though it's like a natural recommendation from the model, that could be, for example, a deceptive practice. We want to make sure we aren't using AI to deceive consumers, and the Federal Trade Commission is focused on that, as well as states. So it's a question right now of whether states should be taking that lead, or maybe the Federal Trade Commission should be taking the lead on that. Okay,
I know this is ancient history, but I've been trying to come up with an idea of, okay, what would deceptive acts or practices, from AI look like? And the only thing that really could come to mind, at least off the top of my head, was, wasn't it just a couple of years ago that Gemini was responding like you would say, show me a picture of George Washington, and it would show a black rendition of George Washington. And there was just, I'm going to use the term wokeness, but I know there were complaints about it. Presumably since then, Gemini has been fixed. But what are some of the other ways that there might be deception or for that matter, ideological bias? I think is one of the concerns that the federal government had brought up, finding its way into AI.
Well, in terms of what the Federal Trade Commission has done so far, they've really focused on AI companies making deceptive claims about the capabilities of their chatbots. So I'm a lawyer. An example I like to give is that a company put out a lawyer chatbot, quote unquote, and they claimed you don't have to hire a human lawyer anymore. You can use our AI chatbot. It's just as effective as human lawyers. It's cheaper. So why bother with human lawyers anymore? And the Federal Trade Commission investigated the capabilities of this AI chatbot, and it turns out it makes some mistakes. It's actually not as good as a human lawyer compared on sort of objective metrics. So that was deceptive by that company. They were deceiving consumers about the capabilities of their AI model. And you bring up the ideological bias and the African-American founding fathers example. That's actually an interesting example, which potentially falls outside of the FTC's authority, because the FTC has authority over deceptive act and practices in commerce. And so that's why false advertising is a good example, because it impacts sort of the buying habits or the shopping habits, or misinforms consumers about buying products in commerce. And if users are engaging with AI models just to sort of talk about life, to sort of ask for what's the best recipe for risotto, what's the best technique for throwing a football, or what were the race of the founding fathers. It's actually sort of up for debate how much that impacts commerce. And that's a little bit outside of what the Federal Trade Commission does. Although it's sort of up for debate. I mean, there could be cases where facts, just misleading facts about the race of the founding fathers could lead consumers to make purchasing decisions based on false information. That could fall under the FTC authority, but in general, the FTC's authority over deception is focused on false advertising, matters of commerce.
Let's talk for a moment about the concept of federalism as it would apply to, who really has the primary responsibility to protect, the people? Do the states under state law, or, is this supposed to be top down from the federal government? How can we sort out who rightly is supposed to be making the rules here?
Yeah, well, traditionally, that's a balance. The federal government takes on certain responsibilities and states take on other responsibilities that are kind of closer to home. The traditional way of thinking is that states have police powers to protect their citizens on issues that are local issues. The states have a better understanding of that than the federal government that deals across all 50 states. AI is a really interesting issue in terms of who should regulate AI. You might not know it from reading my op-ed, but I strongly support federal preemption of state AI laws. I just think it has to be done correctly. And it's a hot debate right now. And I think conceptually, we can all sort of understand why there'd be a problem if all 50 states passed their own AI laws. And you're a startup company trying to launch an AI product, and you have to comply with 50 different laws with maybe conflicting or confusing overlap. So in that way, it makes sense. And also, it's just a really important technology. We want to get the policy correct. So it makes sense for the federal government, with all its resources and all its expertise, to come in and set a standard policy, standard laws for AI across the entire country. The Trump administration is trying to get the FTC to step in and do that. And that's one approach. But overall, it's important to get the federal government involved. And I support that effort.
Okay. I mean, as someone who's just barely learning, the basics about AI, I have to wonder, how far does the authority, even of the federal government, extend into that commercial sphere? I mean, I understand, the need for trade practices and things that again, avoid fraud or deception, but how do we best determine the upper limits of how far the government should be involved?
So on the issue of ideological bias, one upper limit we have to deal with, the government has to deal with, is the First Amendment. And so in terms of the Google Gemini producing Black founding fathers, that was not actually in response to any federal or state law. That was Google deciding how to build their AI chatbot and what training data to use and policies for how they want their bot to respond. They missed the mark on that. They apologized, and they've since corrected so that it won't make false historical facts. But the First Amendment is a big deal, and so the government can't step in and tell private companies, your AI chatbot should say X when it's asked Y.
Okay. No, that makes sense. We're down to just under a minute here, but Andy, I have to ask you, all the regulatory wrangling aside, what do you see as one of the most encouraging things about the development of AI as it currently is taking place?
I think it's really encouraging that the AI companies themselves are voluntarily building safeguards to keep users safe. They're not perfect, but at the moment, there is some sort of confusion from the government about what the guardrails are for AI tools, what they can and can't do. And AI companies are saying, we have ethics. This is important to us. These are powerful tools. We want to make sure our tools don't delve into certain harmful topics or harm users. And they're building guardrails themselves in response to their own values rather than government mandates. And I think that's a great sign.
Again, we are talking with Andy Jung. He is an associate counsel at Tech Freedom, as well as a Young Voices contributor. Where can people find you on social media?
You can find me on x.com, formerly known as Twitter, at Andy Young Tech. And you can also follow me on LinkedIn and follow Tech Freedom's newsletter.
Recording in progress.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. This is our fourth and final segment today, and I'm happy to welcome Isaac Willour back to the show. Isaac, it's been a moment since we've had a conversation. Take a moment here to tell us about who you are and what you do.
Sure, it has been a minute, Brian. Well, it's good to be back. I'm Isaac Willour. I am the director of corporate engagement at Willour Research. We're a corporate engagement consulting firm, proxy voting consulting firm. We represent conservative and Christian investors in front of the world's largest companies. We represent clients ranging from Christian nonprofits to public funds in red states. And so we engage on a lot of issues, including some of the ones we're going to talk about today. These aren't just theories. These aren't just op-eds. These are serious arguments being made to some of the biggest names in corporate America. So it's a pleasure to be on with you to talk about that.
Yeah, let's delve into the concept of hey, if you're warm and dry during this winter, you could be thankful for fossil fuels. Especially, I think this is true for people in the eastern half of the country who have got to experience some real winter here of late. Talk to me about Winter Storm Fern and some of the lessons we might draw from all that lasting cold and how fossil fuels have been a boon.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Eastern United States. I mean, that's me, right? So past couple of weeks, I've been digging the house out from probably somewhere between a foot and a half of snow.
Wow.
And it's been kind of rough, right? We've been having lows of -12. And it got me thinking, partially because obviously as someone who talks to a lot of those companies are energy companies. And we're talking about a lot of issues pertaining to net zero, a lot of issues pertaining to ESG, a lot of issues pertaining to sustainability. And that whole question of, okay, net zero sounds very nice, and there are a lot of very sleekly produced, flimsily argued brochures that'll tell you that it's great. It's the only way to atone for the sins of being an energy company. But look, we just had negative temperatures across a large portion of the United States. We have widespread destruction in some major cities like Nashville. Look, this is a moment of gratefulness, right? I mentioned it in the piece, I'm sure we'll talk about, but look, one of the core aspects of being kind of a Western person, a truly Western person, is gratitude. And if there's one thing you really should be grateful for when temperatures drop and power systems are under heavy stress and energy grids are under heavy stress, it logically follows that the thing that you're grateful for is the thing that keeps that grid running and keeps everyone warm and dry. And in this case, in large part, that is fossil fuels. That is, hydrocarbons. It's natural gas. It is, as it happens, not windmills and solar, because solar, for those of you who've never been to Western Pennsylvania, you can kind of guess why solar doesn't work super well, and the windmills freeze. And I'll tell you what, we should all be very, very thankful for a system, and in this case, in our particular political moment, we should be pretty grateful for an administration that has really prioritized what I refer to, and a lot of other people refer to, as energy realism over kind of the convenient fiction of net zero. And there are kind of two things that kind of spin off of that. One is this is another point in the jar of, net zero is dumb. There is no feasible path to it. There's no feasible way to decarbonize in the entire world. You don't really want a decarbonized world because you want a world where lights turn on and heating systems work. But the second thing is, and maybe this is more prevalent on the political right, is let's all just stop with this whole nostalgia that living back in like the pioneer days was somehow better. I will say, Brian, I don't think most people really think that, but there is a real sense, even just aesthetically, especially with young kind of Gen Z conservative type people, of just nostalgia for, don't you want to live in simpler times where we didn't have all these evil technologies and we all just kind of, sat around under trees and read books. And my thing is, no, not at all. In fact, I'm a very, when it comes to the systems that power our world, and many of those related to energy and so dependent on the energy choices that we make, I'm very pro-modernity in terms of energy, in terms of the things that keep you alive, in terms of the things that make you not freeze to death in the wintertime when it drops down to -12 in Western Pennsylvania. I, for one, do not want to have to Donner Party it when there's a winter storm. And so I think it's a good opportunity the country just suffered a major incidents of winter weather, and we're all by and large okay. There've been some bad things that happened. We mentioned Nashville before, but it's a good opportunity to be grateful for there are systems that are keeping us safe by the ingenuity and hard labor of people a lot cleverer and a lot smarter and a lot more dedicated than most of the people who, A, just punt to nostalgia of the 1800s, and two, people who came up with net zero. It's a moment for gratefulness of not capitulating to either extreme, in my view.
I love this line from your article. For the vast majority of human history and a good bit of American history, the notion of freezing to death in a particularly harsh winter wasn't that unfathomable. And you're not talking about, oh, yes, in the 1700s, that was the case. I mean, it's even just 100 years ago, there were places where, sufficient heating and sufficient shelter could be a challenge. What are the biggest, who are the biggest opponents of carbon-based energy at this point? Is it the green energy companies, or is it just people with an agenda for green energy?
I think the answer is almost certainly the latter. When we're talking about, I think most energy companies, and I'm not just guessing here, right? Because obviously I'm director of a corporate engagement firm. We engage with a lot of energy companies about kind of sustainability initiatives, net zero, ESG, greenhouse gas emissions, that sort of thing. We've talked to these companies and we can see the rapidly building consensus, which arguably was always the technical consensus. It just wasn't palatable to activists always, is that, look, you're not going to decarbonize the world. You cannot bring your emissions down to zero without, one, doing untold damage to human civilization, and two, for a company, doing incredible damage to your ability to be a company, right? It turns out ExxonMobil doesn't want to decarbonize, not because they hate humanity. They're actually providing a great service for humanity. They're an energy company. They're one of the biggest energy companies in the world, right? I think they're the second biggest energy company behind one of the Saudi ones. And look, that is the biggest opponents of that. So the biggest opponents of that are not companies. The biggest opponents of that are activist groups, right? You think about, thinking in particular of some of the European regulators. Obviously, European regulators are not big fans of this stuff. A lot of European sovereign wealth funds, specifically Norway's sovereign wealth fund, which has the gall, the unmitigated audacity to have a sovereign wealth fund that's invested heavily in energy companies and provides return based on the good work of the energy companies, and then uses that power to activistally demand that they do less business in energy. Look, the enemy to all these things, the enemy to progress is always the enemy to progress in a lot of ways is ingratitude, right? And so the antidote to kind of this anti-modernity sentiment that's gone too far is to be grateful. There are systems that work. You may not understand all of them. You may prefer to talk about Aristotle, but look, it's the work of a lot of people who are a lot smarter than you who created this system where you can sit in a warm room when it is negative 12 in Western Pennsylvania and have your discussion about Aristotle. And maybe let's all be thankful for that.
I really appreciate the fact that you pointed out the need for gratitude. And this applies in things other than energy, but this is a good place to start. I see a lot of unhappiness, and I see a lot of people who look for reasons to justify their unhappiness. But if you really want to, kind of put things into perspective and bring things into focus, gratitude sure goes a long way. And this is a great place to start. If you're not shivering in the dark, maybe a little gratitude for, how fortune has smiled upon you would be in order.
Right. I'm told it's a virtue, not just a good psychological practice.
Yeah. Well, it's, and it also, I think, helps us understand that, the way that we've been addressing this need for heat and for shelter and so forth, it didn't come about just because, man took the path of least resistance and out of greed. A lot of brains have been working on this for years, and there may be more advances that we can look forward to, but let's not be ungrateful for what we currently enjoy, if that makes sense.
I would not describe the process of pulling energy out of the planet to be the path of least resistance. That is a path of very, very great resistance that has been handled by people who have a great deal of ambition and are deeply committed to making the world a better place. And by a better place, I mean not being negative 12 degrees.
Again, we are talking with Isaac Willour. Isaac, where can people find you on social media? Where can they find your work?
Yeah, well, in the spirit of resisting the pull of divisive politics, I'm on X, so go follow me on X, ISAACWILLOUR. Hit me up on LinkedIn. I'd love to chat more.